Okay, good morning, afternoon, or evening, everyone. My name is Carl Fay. I'm the chair of the Academy of Management International Management Division Teaching Committee, and I'm very happy to welcome you to the next in our series of teaching-focused IB webinars. Today, we're going to be focusing on what are the advantages of different international business textbooks and the latest developments in teaching new and evolving topics in international business. To help with this, I'm really lucky to have authors of 4 of the leading IB textbooks with me here today. And what we're going to do is we're first going to have each of them very briefly talk about their textbooks and what are the unique features of them. After that, we'll open up to the audience for a period of question and answers, after which we'll have a panel discussion. And part of today is to understand how can we best teach international business and what should be included in that, given the rapid changes we see going around the world, and to understand how textbooks are adapting to keep up with that. Without further ado, I will introduce our first speaker. Our first speaker is Charles Hill, who's a professor emeritus at the Forster School of Business at the University of Washington. He's an award-winning teacher and author of 2 leading international business textbooks, which are both published by McGraw-Hill. The first is International Business, and the second, Global Business Today. He's also an outstanding international business researcher with over 55,000 Google Scholar citations and a practitioner of global strategy, helping firms like Microsoft for over 2 decades and putting his international business strategy knowledge into practice, also in his sailing with his boat, which has twice been ranked among the top 2 in the Northwest, or I'm sorry, the top 1 in the Northwestern US. So without further ado, Charles, over to you to hear about your book.
Okay, thanks. I'd rather talk about sailing, but let's get on to the books. Sailing's a passion. So I guess the first point to make is, Carl says, what's unique about your book? Well, in my case, it's longevity. I wrote the first edition of my book back in 1991, 92. So A, that makes me an old geezer, and B, it means my books have been around for a long time. There's 2 versions. One is International Business. This was the original one. The other is Global Business Today. The difference between these 2 books nowadays is minor. This has 20 chapters. This has 17 chapters. This has more for people who want to go into depth on the international monetary system, on organization structure for international businesses, and on finance and accounting. A lot of people don't want to do that, so they tend to prefer this version of the book. When I first wrote this book, it came about primarily because I was teaching a PhD seminar, actually not at the University of Washington, on international strategy and international business. I looked at some of the existing textbooks and I thought, they're not structured as the way I would structure them, and I think this could be done a little bit differently. And that was the genesis of me writing the IB book. What I've tried to do, and most people do this nowadays, is in a pretty logical fashion, start with globalization, then talk about the environment of international business, starting with country differences in political economy, then culture, then looking at trade theory, trade policy, foreign direct investment theory, foreign direct investment policy, and regional economic integration, which is all environmental stuff. And that's the stuff that we probably should talk about a little bit going forward, because it's been changing rapidly in the last few years. And then going on to firm level stuff, which is talking about strategy, talking about global strategy, entry strategy, different ways of entering foreign markets, exporting, joint ventures, licensing, and so on, wholly owned subsidiaries. And then going on and looking at functional aspects, including exporting, production and supply chain management, which is becoming progressively more important, marketing, and human resources. And finally, at least in my big book, closing off with finance and accounting and the multinational business. One thing that I've tried to do throughout, and this has always been important to me, is to write a book that is sequential, logical, where the chapters build on each other. So there's a constant sort of reference back, and that's always been important. It's like a musician, you know, when they write an album and all the songs to connect. I think a textbook should be the same. The chapters are the songs, and they should all have a theme or a thematic in them. And you know, the thematic for the first 20 years that I wrote this book was globalization, the lowering of trade barriers, lowering of barriers to foreign direct investment, rapid development of countries around, spread of democracy, spread of markets. And that was the nature of the era. The interesting thing, of course, that's happened in the last 10 years is that we've entered a reactionary era. We have seen a shift away from at least popular support for globalization. In the United States, if you use the word globalist, it's a dirty word. We've seen trade barriers start to go up. We're starting to see barriers to foreign direct investment for reasons of quote unquote national security. Obviously, we are seeing geopolitical conflicts. We are seeing a retreat from democracy. We're seeing a rise of authoritarianism. The free market philosophy or neoliberal philosophy that used to underpin a lot of what was going on in the world is, at the very least, under attack. And what that means, of course, is that the world in which we live in is different. And as textbook authors, and I'm sure my colleagues will say the same thing, we have to relate to this. It's a different world that we live in with different challenges. And what I try to do in my book, and I've been trying to do this for the last 10 years, and every time I do it, I'm writing more and more and more, is how do firms react to this? What does this mean for your supply chain? What does this mean for the way in which you compete? And how are you going to adapt to a changing world where instead of barriers to trade falling, barriers to trade are rising, instead of certainty, you've got uncertainty, instead of a World Trade Organization that is managing a multilateral rules-based international order, we've got a more chaotic system in which the World Trade Organization has been gutted. It has, by the way, the arbitration mechanism has been gutted by the Trump and Biden administrations. So we're living in a different world. And in that world, you know, you have to try to figure out what the implications are for strategy, what the implications are for the different functional activities of the organization are, what the implications are for different functions. And I've been trying to weave that throughout the book. I'm not sure that's unique, but that's been one of my main challenges over the last decade, and it's only accelerating right now. So that's become very important. The other thing that I think is important, at least for me, has been to, and I'm sure it's true of my colleagues, is to stress the managerial implications of a lot of the material that I discuss in the book. I am, by training, an economist. I would say that probably my book is a little bit more economic heavy than some others out there in the market. I make no apologies for that, but I think it's incumbent upon me to explain the implications of things such as trade theory, concepts such as the gains from trade, and what they mean for managers. And so in every chapter of my book, and this is particularly relevant with the first 12 chapters that deal with the environment, I'm at pains to point out the managerial implications for trade theory, for foreign direct investment theory and policy, for regional economic integration, and for changes in the political economy of different nations around the world. So I think those things are extremely important. And with regard to the changing environment, I've tried to weave that in and continue to try to weave that in to the discussion of the managerial implications, which you'll find at the end of every chapter in my book. So those are things that I try to achieve. How am I doing on time here, Carl?
You have about another 4 minutes.
Okay, I've got another 4 minutes. Why use a textbook like mine? Why does anybody use a textbook? I think that's another issue that probably we should discuss. I think one of the competitors that we all have in the marketplace with books are the people who don't use books. There's a large number of people who do not use textbooks. And so that's another issue that I try to address when I write a book. What am I trying to do? What are my colleagues trying to do? I'm trying to provide um, a synthesis and curate topics for you and put them together in a logical way so that you do not have to do that. I think it's difficult to put together content as a professor on a subject matter that is so complex and vast and covers multidisciplinary areas as international business. And I think to the extent that we can take some of that load off you, I think that's an argument for using a textbook. A couple of other points. Textbooks used to be really expensive. The move to digitalization has dramatically lowered the price of books. My Global Business Today book now is one-third of the price digitally than the hardcover was 10 years ago. That's without adjusting for inflation. So we're trying to curate stuff for you. We're trying to make it easy for you as instructors. We're trying to sift through a large amount of research and a large amount of current events of what's happening in the world, pull it together in a format that's easier for you to accept, to access and easy for students to access. The price point has come right down thanks to digitalization. The other thing that digitalization is doing, which is something for you to bear in mind, is it's allowing for customization. So you don't have to buy the full book anymore. If you only want 12 chapters, that's what you can focus on. If you only want four, you can go for that. And we're seeing a rise in that. I'm not sure if this is true for my other colleagues. I suspect it is to a degree. But for my books, 90% of the sales are now digital. We rarely deal with hard copy. Okay, Carl, I think I'm pretty much out of time here.
Great. Thank you very much, Charles, for getting us started. Really interesting to hear how your book is evolving over the years. We're now going to turn to Mike Peng, and Mike is the Jindal Chair of Global Strategy and Executive Director of the Center for Global Business at the Jindal School of Management at the University of Texas at Dallas. He's also the president of the Asian Academy of Management, where he's also a fellow. And he's as well a fellow of the Academy of International Business and a National Science Foundation Career Award winner. An active researcher, he's written over 170 articles, 70 of which are FT50 articles. This has resulted in about 67,000 Google Scholar citations, ranking him by Google Scholar #1 in global strategy and #3 in international business by Google Scholar. He's author of several books, including Global Business, Global Strategy, and Global. And there is also a European EMEA edition of his international business book with Klaus Meyer. I know Klaus Meyer is also on the call with us here now. So, Mike, thanks for joining us. Over to you to hear a bit about your book and how it's evolving.
Thank you, Carl. Good morning, good evening, good day. Let me start by emphasizing the competition we're talking about is really friendly. I consider all of my distinguished colleagues here my friends. Some of you may know Charles Skill was my PhD advisor. So Charles, I'm forever grateful for the training that you provided. I met Paul when I was a PhD student many years back. And I also took a class with Gary. I even interviewed Gary in the context of this class for his earlier work as a practitioner in export management. So it was all very, very, very useful, very enlightening. So it's such a delight to join the festivities here. About the books, let me share the screen. Um, okay, are we sharing the screen? Are you seeing my
Yes, we see
screen?
your slides now.
Very good. So I was asked by Carl to talk about these books. So one thing I want to emphasize is that IB textbooks are IB products. We not only compete in the home countries of these books, but also compete around the world. So in my case, this is actually my opening case for every, I actually show the book some covers. So here is the European EMEA adaptation with Klaus Meyer, but we also have a Spanish edition. We also have different Chinese editions. We also have Spanish and Portuguese editions to cater to a different market. I'm moving slower. Okay. We also have the India South Asian edition, and my keyboard is slower. There is also a paperback. The paperback was designed to lower the price point. We condensed everything, even the word business from the title. So we got rid of business from global business. It's just called global. Very quickly, in the limited time that we have, what's going on with my book? We talk about differentiation, but we also want to talk about the common aspects of all books. I think the friendly competition we're having is helping to support the field. So in this field that we are having, for legitimacy reasons, we must cover a common set of core topics. But on top of these topics, what are the areas of differentiation? As Charles rightly commented, the field is characterized by the vast complexity and scope of the events of the world, cultures, countries, politics, and these events are moving very rapidly. So I take it upon myself as an IB professor, but also a textbook author, to simplify the world for our students. So I claim in the books that all we need to do at the end of the day is to boil down to this fundamental framework, which I've used not only in chapter 1, but throughout all chapters. That is, don't forget about the fundamental question, which is at the end of the day, what determines the success and failure of firms around the globe? We care about performance. That's the business part, international business. And then how do we answer these questions? There are endless ways of answering these questions. But again, with some crude simplification, we could organize the materials as the institution-based view and the resource-based view. And that has been...
Mike, I'm sorry to interrupt for a second, but I don't think your slides are advancing the way you're hoping they are.
The slides are not advancing?
You're still on the first slide.
Ah.
I don't think you're in full slide mode. We can see like 4 of your slides on the left and the main
Maybe,
slide.
but Carl, can I bother you to show my slides?
I can try to do that.
Yeah. Sorry about this, but I can see my slides are moving. If you tell me your slides are your slides are up, or I can stop here, right?
Yeah, you need to stop sharing first.
Okay, I'm stopped. Sorry about this, but that's why I sent you my slides.
Keep talking, and I will get them up here in a second.
Okay, I can actually see my slide here, but the point here is to suggest a consistent framework to students that based on previous student feedback, the class is fun. The subject has great material, very enriching, but they complain about the vast amounts of materials they have to grasp. So we have to constantly confront the so what question. And I think that one fundamental question, two frameworks, the so what question can help us organize the materials and make some progress in reducing the fear and loathing effect that some of our students are having. What do we do? How can I handle this? Well, now I cannot move my slide, so we're waiting for you. Close sharing.
Okay, hopefully you have them now. I'm now at chapter 1. What one do you want to have up?
Well, why don't you start with chapter the first page so people can see the complete rundown.
Okay, I'm now back to the very beginning?
Okay, so this is the first one, and then go to the second one. I was just showing these different cover pages: Europe, EMEA, Chinese, Spanish. Next one, Spanish, Portuguese, India, South Asia. Next, for paperback, global, and then yeah, that's great. So I was just covering this part. A consistent frameworks has been used in all chapters. I've been disciplining myself not to expand the trees too much. Next one, please, Carl. So every chapter has a beefy debates and extension section with that title. Um, this is a fun part because IB is full of debates from the beginning. Now, as Charles said, the debates are becoming more spicy. So to capture some of these spicy debates, I wrote such a section. Every chapter has three, sometimes four debates. So with COVID, do we do just in time or just in case management? But beyond COVID, there's this big debate about global value chain versus regional value chain, resilience, all the useful topics in the media that can be brought into the discussion of this debate and many other debates. Next one, please. Um, we also have a section on management savvy. Every chapter has one. As Charles was saying, first 20 years of his career, that was also the professional career of me and Gary, I believe. It was all about going into one direction, but now we are into this new era with changed directions. So my argument is even in a less global world, for students, there are tremendous career opportunities. People with such expertise in the following areas: managing geopolitics, managing tariffs and trade compliance, supply chain reorganization, and management of complex stakeholders and climate change challenges. The world needs such people. These are elusive, complex, hard to pin down, hard to quantify topics. And if you train yourself to be become familiarized with these topics, then even in a less global world, there will be opportunities, and that is a refreshing dose of career encouragement I want to give all my students. Instead of talking about this very depressing, deglobalizing world, what do we do? And for our IB textbook authoring standpoint, I think the recent changes are making old books, old editions obsolete. So we look forward to selling more copies. So that's another opportunity, the chaos part that we can capitalize on. Next one, please, Carl. So also one aspect is about cases. Every chapter has one opening case, one closing case, several in focus boxes, and we also have a bunch of integrative so-called longer cases, which are really shorter in length. So just give you a flavor of some of these cases. Chapter 1 opening case is Apple, America, and China. This cartoon, of course, was made more than 4 years ago. But you know what? This cartoon is becoming relevant and timely as we speak now. So the big question I want to use in this case is, what is the role of global business in the middle of these two countries? And to make it easy to understand, I basically argue and I walk students through how Tim Cook deals with the US government's pressures to migrate supply chains out of China, and how Tim Cook has been playing ball in China with Chinese government officials. And at the same time, Apple has been delivering extraordinary performance, becoming the first company with $1 trillion of capitalization. How can Apple do this? And the fundamental argument is the role of global business is to be there connecting these two countries and connecting not only these two countries, but many, many other countries and peoples and companies around the world. If Apple did not do what it's doing, perhaps the hotheads in Washington, Beijing, may become hotter. Therefore, there is this very useful value adding contribution that global business can do is really to help preserve world peace. And that's very hard work. And Carl, next one, please. So this is a real picture of Tim Cook shaking hands with a Chinese government official. So the key point here is global business has a function to do that is called corporate diplomacy. Previously, when we talked about diplomacy, it tends to talk about diplomacy at the country level. We don't even bother this as country level or international diplomacy. It is just diplomacy. But for global business, we now have to emphasize corporate diplomacy. And corporate diplomacy is to connect these people, but also helping accomplish your organizational goals. So Tim Cook went to China after COVID, moving some of the supply chain functions out. But still, the key sentence is, can we still be friends while I'm withdrawing from your country? That actually is a very difficult sentence to say. I actually made all my students to do it here in this online environment. I cannot make you say that, but I made every student in the room to say that sentence. It turns out this is so hard to say because how can we be friends? Usually is an awkward sentence to say when someone tries to marry you. And you want to say no without using the word no. Now, how can we be friends? Well, I'm withdrawing from your country. That's incredibly difficult to say. You got to stick in your skin. You got to have this beautiful smile. And you got to have some compelling arguments that Tim Cook is saying, must be saying. I don't know the contents, but I can speculate. We used to have 1 million jobs inside China. We're so sorry, we cannot do this anymore. But we're still keeping 500,000 jobs. And China is still our #1 consumer market. Therefore, I hope we can still be friends. And that is the kind of global business work we must train our students to do. Carl was asking me what's my favorite class, what's my favorite case. So this is one. Next one, please. So another differentiating aspect of my books is very significant attention and space devoted to emerging markets / global south. For example, chapter 10, we talk about opening case, focusing on SAB Miller going to Nigeria. Nigeria is the largest African country in terms of population, second largest in GDP, a major cultural influencer in terms of its music, video, and film TV exports to the rest of the African continent. So a win in Nigeria can have major implications for that part of the world. So that's one case I just wanted to show. Next one, please, Carl. Chapter 10 clothing case is about Amazon entering India. Amazon lost China completely. So Jeff Bezos said, we must win in India. Here is like a physical check of $4 billion, the world's largest ever physical check that's being written. Don't think about making money, keep losing money. So that's creating a very interesting set of dynamics as well. Next one, Carl. This is my last one. So lots of updates. We can share more, but in terms of chapters, I'm in the middle of working on my 6th edition, and I will change my chapter 10 foreign market entry into foreign market entry and exit. That is really in keeping with the times. Exit has always been existing in IB because if a new multinational goes in with an acquisition and a previous incumbent M&E subsidiary is being sold. So under normal economic times, exit happens all the time. But we in IB, myself included, have been so excited about the entering aspects. There is 1,000 papers about international market entries, perhaps 50 or fewer about exits. Guess what? Practitioners are making it necessary that we must have a more balanced perspective. If we're training people to be good at entering, we must also train people to be good at exiting. And exits are very, very hard. And the Russian invasion of Ukraine creates a major push. How do we do it? How do we exit? Exit is not just getting out. Even if you want to sell off, you cannot dump all your assets and you cannot lay off all your employees. And you have built 20 years, 30 years of your business inside Russia. McDonald's in Moscow, for example, was a case that I started paying attention before I became a doctoral student. So there are a number of bells and whistles associated with exits. How do you handle these stakeholders, ranging from former host country governments all the way to host country employees and many other groups. So this is a new IB research area, I would argue. But for textbook purposes, this is what I'll do. I hope my colleagues will do some of this work as well. So that's that. Thanks very much. timing-wise is okay?
Thank you very much, Mike. I really appreciate hearing about that. And indeed, the foreign market exit surely of growing importance and something maybe we can talk about in our discussion even more. We look forward to seeing your revised chapter on that. Now we're going to turn to Gary Knight, who has taught international business for nearly 30 years and has lived and worked in many countries. He's president now of the Academy of International Business and the Jackson Chair in International Management at Willamette University. He's won a number of teaching awards, including the Excellence in Teaching Award and Best Teacher in the MBA program. And he's co-authored 6 books and more than 60 refereed articles. His research, which emphasizes IB strategy and emerging markets and internationalization in small and medium-sized enterprises. He's ranked among the top 5 scholars in the US and top 15 worldwide in IB research, according to Google Scholar. And he's author of the textbook International Business, The New Realities. The 6th edition is the current edition, co-authored with Tamar Cavaskill and also John Reisenberger. Gary, thank you so much for making time in your busy schedule to be with us. Over to you. We see your slides well.
Thank you very much, Carl, and I'm glad to hear that you can see my slides well. Thank you, Carl Fay, for organizing this webinar. I'll just mention that Mike Peng and I think he alluded to this, we started out our IB careers together at the University of Washington, where I was an MBA student and Mike was a PhD student. And I think Mike's one of his mentors was indeed Charles Hill at the time. That was more than 30 years ago. And around the same time, Paul Beamish had become editor-in-chief of the Journal of International Business Studies. And as we've mentioned at the very beginning, I don't think people heard, but Paul Beamish is sort of has produced more AIB fellows in other words, he's directed and created more IB scholars and professors than just about anybody in the world. So it's really an honor to be together with you folks today. I'm going to talk about our book, International Business, The New Realities, which just came out recently in the 6th edition. And are my slides advancing, Carl?
Yes, they are.
Thank you. So we wrote this book, the first edition came out in 2008. Colleagues Tamar Cavaskill, who, by the way, is Dean of the Fellows of the AIB these days, and I'm coincidentally serving as president, and our colleague John Reisenberger, who I think is here with us, who worked as a contributing faculty member at Thunderbird for many years, but made his career primarily in the private sector, where, for example, he was a vice president for international for a leading pharmaceutical. So we have both a scholarly and a practitioner orientation in our book. We call the book CKR after our initials, and we did have an emphasis from the beginning on the new realities, which already at that time mainly for us referred to emerging markets. Just a quick mention of the content of the book. This is the table of contents in brief. 17 chapters. It's a fairly standard table of contents with the first half of the book focused on the environment of international business and the second half focused on the strategy, so to speak, of international business. And I mention it's standard because I think instructors prefer to see a similar organization as they're teaching international business. And I think that's true across most fields in general. But by the same token, we do have some distinctive features, which I will talk about shortly. Charles Hill mentioned that book pricing has come down a lot in recent years, and that's due to digitalization, and I think that's true across the board. our book and other books are much more accessible to folks today than for a very long time, maybe than ever before. And as Mike Peng alluded to, our book is also available in various languages like Spanish and Chinese. But I'll just talk momentarily about the characteristics of today's students. They tend to be Generation Z, born between 1997 and 2012. As we know, they tend to be tech savvy. Obviously, they grew up with smartphones, with social media, and now, in the last couple of years, with artificial intelligence. So they expect a more of a technology-enabled learning environment, an online the access to an online platform, which I'll talk about in more detail in respect to our book. They're more sensitive to diversity and inclusiveness, which is obviously very appropriate. I mean, I think back to when I was an undergraduate student. The situation is very different today. There's a great deal more diversity in terms of culture and language and ethnic origin and so forth. And today's students are also much more conscientious about working conditions, the social environment, and the natural environment. Other things, I think that increasingly students are attuned to the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations, and I think that's a useful framework, in fact, to utilize for talking about those types of issues. Students today are also much more, well, I would say they're relatively more career focused. And maybe that has to do with the coming through the COVID crisis and the economy, kind of the uncertain economy of the last decade or so. They're more career focused, focusing their coursework, frankly, in more traditional areas, but also areas that are more likely to get them a job. And so in some senses, that's not necessarily a strong focus in IB, and that's something that we have to navigate as textbook authors. There are also, the students tend to be more independent learners, and I think that's a function of perhaps COVID-19 and the learning environment that existed then, but also many young people grew up in single child or two-child households. Many prefer self-directed online learning via online resources and videos, clearly, and also textbooks on digital and mobile platforms. And again, that's also a function of their orientation to social media and to smartphones. Now, some of the focus areas in our book, Cavaskill, Knight, and Riesenberger, 6th edition, is that we try to keep every edition as up to date as possible, consistent with our title, The New Realities. In the latest edition, for example, most chapters have new or heavily revised cases coming from major important sources like the World Bank or major consultancies like McKinsey, or leveraging global indices that are now quite common online nowadays, and other respected sources. We emphasize having a lot of new and contemporary examples. We emphasize a more visual approach. And in our book, the 6th edition, we have many new and updated exhibits throughout. For example, we feature new material on contemporary topics like nationalism, digital technologies, women in international business, ethics and corporate social responsibility, sustainability, and many others. We emphasize, as I mentioned, a digital platform for teaching and learning. I think everybody does this now, but we have many resources online, and of course, digital versions of the textbook, which have helped to bring the pricing down dramatically in recent years. We feature various resources to support and optimize learning and studying for students. So see, these are some of the distinctive features. Carl asked us to talk about the unique features of our textbooks. We feel that ours is practical and application oriented. I think we're more practitioner-oriented through our writing style, for instance, and our cases, our exercises, and our many examples throughout the book. I think that we have a relatively contemporary focus. For instance, small and medium enterprises are collectively contributing as much to international business in terms of trade and investment as, say, the 500 largest multinational enterprises today. We've also always, from the beginning, focused on emerging markets as well as advanced economies, and somewhat in more recent years, the digital transformation, and always from the beginning, technology. We have a strong emphasis in the cultural perspective and in ethics and CSR and sustainability. We have always tried to be relatively neutral. I think some people know that, for example, Tamer Kavaskill grew up in Turkey, so we have more of a global approach. We feature emphasis on both advanced economies and emerging markets. We are not US-centric, and we also emphasize not just large firms, but also small and medium enterprises and international entrepreneurship, which is an area, for example, that Tamer and I have done a lot of research on born global firms, for example. We emphasize innovative learning tools, global edge exercises. For example, I should mention that Global Edge is probably the leading international business search engine in the world, and it was actually created by my co-author, Tamer Kavaskill, Professor Kavaskill. Experiential exercises, contemporary cases, digital platform, and other innovative learning tools. We try to be user-friendly. We aim for a clear and accessible writing style with a good flow and emphasis on, as I mentioned, visual aids, lots of exhibits, and illustrative frameworks to explain international business, because we know that a lot of folks are more visually oriented, especially today, than oriented to the written word. We think that we're relatively pedagogically flexible. Faculty can customize the content via our modular approach. They can order, in fact, customized books with a smaller number of chapters or with the course material that they desire to fit their needs and their timing in the course. Our book is not overly detailed with dense writing. We are not overly theory-oriented or overly traditional, and we are not overly focused on specific traditional disciplines like management or strategy. We are also interested in marketing and finance and so forth. Some of the key trends in pedagogy, which we try to reflect as much as possible in our book, is to be up to date and relevant. Obviously, trying to be as contemporary. It's one of the exciting things about international business is that there's so much new things happening all the time that it actually makes it almost enjoyable to update the book, because you can bring in material on the new trends, new data, new statistics, and so forth that are coming out all the time. And that's reflected in our content, our cases, our exercises, and our activities. A practical application. Again, I think students today are more oriented to their careers, to skill development, and we emphasize hands-on exercises and activities. Innovative pedagogy, that is a function of digitalization. Links to videos and podcasts, I think, are expected nowadays. Experiential learning. I know that in my teaching, I have shifted greatly towards the direction of experiential teaching than I was doing 5 or 10 years ago. We also know there's the trend towards gamification, which we feature, for example, in our online site. Again, a stronger orientation to visual displays of information and data. Customizable and adaptable. I think that's mass customization is kind of increasingly the norm. Some other key trends in pedagogy. digital and interactive features. Some of our students will look at book chapters, for example, will read them on their smartphones. So books have to be organized to accommodate that, which we do. As we know, artificial intelligence has become a thing, particularly in the past 2 years, and I'm sure that we're all grappling with this. But that is something that we wish to feature more and more in a proactive way in our book, in our teaching. A focus on ethics, sustainability, and diversity, equity, and inclusiveness, and strong instructor resources, not only the traditional resources, but various other resources that are available via a strong digital platform that facilitates and automates learning and teaching for the Gen Z students of today. So thank you very much. Thanks again for this opportunity. I will end there.
Thank you very much, Gary. Really interesting to hear about your book and how it's evolving. Our last presenter will be Paul Beamish. He has co-authored over 63 books and 150 refereed articles, resulting in 48,000 Google Scholar citations for his research. He served as the editor-in-chief of JIBS and as a fellow of the Royal Society of Canada and the past dean of the Academy of International Business Fellows. Paul has supervised 36 PhD dissertations, and based on that has ended up having his students win more Best Dissertation Awards from the Academy of Management International Business Division and AIB than any other supervisor, I believe. He has done research on diverse topics, but is probably most famous for his work on international joint ventures. Today, he's spending much of his effort on the 39 country initiative, which he started, and provides cases from Ivy free of charge to the 46 poorest countries in the world, a very noteworthy and worthy initiative that's having huge impact. Paul has also authored 165 case studies, 22 of which have won awards, and 17 have been bestsellers not only at Ivy, where he works, but also at Harvard Business School. He's author of the best-selling textbook that's now in its 9th edition, Transnational Management, co-authored in the current edition together with Chris Bartlett and Andrew Delios. Paul, thanks very much for taking time to be with us today. We look forward to hearing about your book.
Thanks very much, Carl. Hope everyone can hear me okay. It's a great time to be an international business professor. All we have to do is wake up in the morning and there's interesting things going on. So I think we're all fortunate to have either chosen this field or landed up in this field, as the case may be for some. I want to take just a few minutes. I don't have a PowerPoint presentation because, as I mentioned earlier, after the first 1,000 PowerPoints, I find they get a bit old. I'd rather just chat with folks if that's at all possible. But if you prefer a PowerPoint, I'm happy to send a PowerPoint to anybody who's got a compulsive need for them. I'm just kidding, Gary, and it's we like PowerPoints. But anyway, this is the 9th edition of the book. We have a new co-author, Chris Bartlett and I, and that is Andrew Delios, who's based in Singapore. And Carl, speaking of the 39 country initiative, he's going in like 3 weeks' time to Cambodia to put on some case teaching workshops for us there. So kudos to Andrew for helping out in that way. Our book has got continues to have 8 chapters. Like everyone else, when you do a new edition, and ours, this is the book. It came out a couple of months ago, so it's very current. Everyone updates their chapters or adds or subtracts or changes the titles and so on. Yep. So we've done that, but we've maintained the same broad logic, knowing that much has to be changed in the book itself. So there's 8 chapters, and unlike most books, this one is much more case study heavy. So we have 32 comprehensive cases in the book, 4 for each chapter. Each of those cases can be used for an entire 80-minute class. That's the way they were written. And a lot of the newest content is not synthesized in a paragraph of text. It's actually what the case is about. And so many of the new themes that people are talking about are themes that we've provided emphasis on. We've done a couple of new things for this edition. I mean, we've got the standard PowerPoint slide decks for those who want to lecture in class, have a mini lecture at some point for each chapter. We've got a much larger test bank that's new again to this edition. But a couple of other things. One is that we put together a curated list of videos that can be used with the cases. And so a lot of people are, it's more hybrid teaching now. Some people do some of their sessions online, or sometimes their courses are online. And so the use of videos is helpful. So for the 32 cases, we've curated a list of over 100 videos that can be, of course, used as reviewing tasks during class or after class as follow-up. And this, I had to watch 500 videos to get it down to 100 that were meaningful. So I'm pleased about that, because to me, this is, it's not just teaching with cases, it's not just lecturing, but as others have commented, we need to have a little more content that reflects the generation that's out there. And they don't read as much. They like to watch things. Okay, so and some of the videos are really quite impactful, quite useful. As mentioned, of course, the cases themselves are the sort of the largest section of the book. And they're great cases. I was trying to figure out, and the main reason is Chris Bartlett. I mean, he, as you, I think, are all aware, he's the world's all-time best-selling case writer by a wide margin. And so drawing on his bestsellers and my bestsellers and bestsellers of others, I believe that this book has got more best-selling cases than any book in any discipline ever published. There's over 20 of them, and more. I keep getting notices that another case that's in the book has just been made a bestseller at Harvard and elsewhere. So if you teach with cases, this is a book that I think the objective evidence is that it's got really great cases. And this is partially a reflection of all 3 authors. All of us are active case writers and have been for a long time. All of us are really heavily connected to practice. I spend still a great deal of time talking to practitioners and what they're doing and why they're doing it. And so in that sense, Charles mentioned that, his roots are in economics. Mine are more in management, and the same for Chris Bartlett and Andrew Delios. We're much more managerial practice than a lot of people in academia, in business academia would be, just because we've had corporate experience. I used to work for Procter & Gamble. I've written now 170 cases, and the vast majority of these are field-based. I go and talk to the CEOs of the general managers. And so that keeps it pretty relevant. All of the cases, of course, have very comprehensive teaching notes. It's one of the secrets of, if you want to write a best-selling case, write a great teaching note, because a whole lot of people they live and die by the teaching note. Lots of people get books assigned that they have to, courses they have to teach, and if they haven't got good teaching notes, there's no point on this. And of course, having said that, I mean, some people go and do their own thing with the case, but you need a good base teaching note for anyone to teach cases effectively. Ours is not a survey book. We don't attempt to go through and have chapters on each of the international dimensions of each of the functional areas. So in that sense, it's more management focused. There's people who've actually used the book for their strategy course because I mean, all of us, I think, would characterize ourselves as primarily international strategy professors because that's our primary route. So it's not survey books. All of us, though, Gary, to your point about SMEs, I mean, all of us have done lots of work working with SMEs also. And so, there's cases in there that are very much about SMEs. It's not just the cases about the $20 billion club, which is my old-fashioned characterization of the biggest multinationals, which, that's something that, it takes a while to get your head around just how big they are and how complex these organizations can be. So, but I'm going to stop there because to me, the value of these sessions, frankly, is much more on the Q&A. I mean, the four of us are here today, and thank you, Carl, for doing this. The four author representatives, we're here to answer questions, and that to me, if we can just keep our time on that, Carl, I mean, I think that's most helpful. People may have questions, and whatever they are, we're all game. So, back to you.
Okay, with that, thank you very much, Paul, for a very interesting presentation of your book. And as Paul said, we now are turning over to questions and answers from the audience. So please raise your virtual hand if you have a question that you would like to ask. Who would like to go first? So we have one question from Cliff that he's written digitally, and that is, does your digital rights management permit students to run digital chapters through AI to summarize material for AI to ask them interactively relevant questions to determine if they understand the material? Who would like to answer that first?
I'll give it a try.
Okay.
I don't know. This is a great question. Honestly, it's a great question. I've never thought about that. I'm not sure if that's possible with McGraw-Hill's digital rights platform at this point. I'm going to ask my editors that.
Okay, anyone else want to add to that?
Well, I would just simply say that I think that just using even Chat GPT, you can put in any variety of questions from a given chapter. I think in any of our books, the questions that you would create and ask Chat GPT, and that will give you, I believe, a pretty good answer that would be relevant to the learning process.
Okay, let's move on to the next question, which comes to us from Lutz Perus. And he asked, how do you treat topics like negative externalities, irresponsibility, corporate misbehavior? Are they addressed and exceptions to normal IB, or should IB textbooks draw out systematically where IB context enables such behavior? Do we have a volunteer to answer that?
I can try. Every chapter, well, ethics is not addressed in just one chapter. Every chapter has some discussion of marking or stamp ethical dilemmas. There are lots of tough IB decisions. How do you withdraw from Russia without firing everybody else? How do you maintain goodwill with the Russian government? counterfeiting drugs are being made against your company's products, but these people making these counterfeiting drugs are poor rural farmers in country X. You report to the authorities, they will lose their livelihood. Do you report to the authorities? So yeah, there's lots of such coverages, and we need to engage students on such challenging and uncomfortable topics.
Anyone else in corporate misbehavior and related activities?
Sure, if I may, just quickly. I actually forgot to mention this, but we do have a chapter on ethics in my book. But it's really a very interesting question, because the reality is that if you're operating in a world of nations with very, very different political systems, oligarchs, authoritarianism, a lot of corruption, which is something I talk about quite a bit in the book. You have to think about that, and you have to think about the ethical thing to do. So I think that it's not an add-on. I think it's central to the topic. Mike mentions he does it in every chapter. I don't do that, but I do have a chapter that focuses on it. I think it's extremely important. And definitely not an add-on. It's central to the essence of the book: ethics, corporate social responsibility, negative externalities around things like pollution, climate change are also extremely important, and are discussed and should be discussed, I think.
Thanks very much. Anyone else on the panel want to add?
No. Paul, do you want to go ahead?
You go first.
Yeah. I'll just mention that we started out with our book to integrate ethical and social responsibility dimensions into every chapter. And then actually the publisher came back to us and said that it's probably better to have a standalone chapter on those issues. And so we developed a standalone chapter on that as well. So we both integrate them and also have a separate chapter so that instructors can emphasize it. One of the most interesting aspects of international business and teaching IB is that there's a lot of opportunities for firms to misbehave around the world, or there's lots of different standards of ethics and lots of different institutional environments around the world. So it makes it all very interesting. And actually, if it can be, well, it's more interesting to teach in a sense, because ethics and these issues apply all across the value chain. And so our answer would be that we have both a standalone chapter, and it's also integrated into all of the different value chain topics throughout our book: finance, marketing, HR, etc.
Thanks, Gary. Paul?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the nice things about cases is that you definitely land up talking about bad behavior on the part of different organizations. And for one of the cases that I finished, which is in the book, subsequent to finishing the case, the company, which thought that they were doing a great job, got called out in Africa for the poor treatment of their employees. And so we've now got videos from the local news station that show, these guys, having their employees live in substandard housing and conditions and things like that. And these sorts of things really make these issues come alive in ways that would not be otherwise possible. You're seeing real pictures of real people who have been mistreated. And so what the heck are you going to do about it? I mean, it's one of the advantages of cases. So, we've got a number of cases that do that sort of thing.
Okay, we also have a question from Cordula. Cordula asks, should we motivate PhD students to think about potential book contributions and future textbook writing? Anyone want to comment on that? The need to motivate PhD students to write more textbooks to create more competition and continue on the traditions you guys have started.
Well, I just got it. Oh, Mike,
Well,
I'll go. You go first.
Charles.
As a former PhD student of Charles Hill, I would say Charles never encouraged me to do it. I would not encourage my students to do that. However, Charles encouraged me, and I was able to contribute a case to Charles' first edition. I think I added maybe 0.5% to the success of the first edition, Charles. So no, I'm encouraging my PhD students to consider case contributions, small caselets, boxes, a favorite topic of their own, which can be developed into a research topic. So that's what I would do.
I have a little anecdote, which was that I was told explicitly not to write a textbook when I was an assistant professor. And I was told that it would derail me and I wouldn't get tenure and the world would collapse. And quite frankly, I think that in terms of influence and satisfaction, it was perhaps a risky thing, but it was the best thing I ever did. So I don't know how you weigh that up, but I think, as academics, we have an obligation to communicate not just to other academics, but we have an obligation to communicate to our students and to the world. And textbooks are part of the mechanism for doing that. So it's one possible route, albeit with risks attached to it.
Okay, some other questions. If other people have questions, please raise your hand. I'm fine and would encourage actually you to talk
Carl,
rather than just writing in chat. Or does someone else want to add to this?
I'll just add to that if I can. I mean, years ago, I learned that professors are supposed to, I have three responsibilities. We're supposed to create new knowledge through the research process. We're supposed to disseminate knowledge through teaching, but we're also supposed to maintain knowledge. And I think that's where textbooks come into play. Now, my friend Cordula is in France, I believe, and I think that standards vary around the world. And I think that writing books is more appropriate in certain countries, and that would be definitely the case. But I think in North America, we tend to be in academia a little bit. We're trained to focus more on doing research and creating new knowledge.
Okay,
Yeah,
some
Carl,
other questions.
I'll just add to that, Carl, if I could. Cordula, I don't know if you've heard the stat on the mean number of editions of new textbooks. The mean number is 1. So I would not encourage anybody who's pre-tenure to spend their time on writing a textbook, okay, especially a new textbook. If you may be able to join an author team in the latter stages of being an assistant professor, but even that is it's a bit risky. And I would echo some of the comments about start small. Maybe write. Aim to write one comprehensive case that will get used in somebody's book as a starting point, and then go from there. And lots of people may say don't do it. If you have a passion, go for it, but not until you're safe. So get tenure first somewhere.
Maybe I want to add further to this discussion, given that Charles's early advice. I don't know where, Charles, you got this advice from your earlier employers. So there is certainly the sentiment, don't do textbooks, it's not research. So I had a discussion with some of my colleagues. So one way to encourage more book writing in defense of your book writing efforts is to say, look, writing a textbook is literature review. Okay, so it's not against research or non-research, it's research-based, evidence-based. That is part of what we do. So just to add to some of Charles's point. But on the other hand, on Paul's point about the mean number of editions being 1, yes, this is a very entrepreneurial venture. Most entrepreneurial ventures do not succeed. So you have to know the risk. I agree with that as well.
Okay, thanks very much. Please, Gary.
I'll just mention that I feel like I know more today than I did when I was first starting out. And so that's another reason to not write a textbook if you're going to write one at all until much later in your career, because I feel like I'm much better equipped today to write one than I was, when I was first out of the PhD program at Michigan State.
Okay, any other questions from the audience? Really would encourage them. Please raise your virtual hand if you have one, or if you don't know how to do that, just unmute yourself and ask it. Well, while people are thinking, perhaps I can ask a question. And that is, I wonder if each of you could very briefly, and I mean briefly, like in 1 minute or so, describe the session that is somehow related to your textbook that you like the most to teach yourself? And perhaps we can start off with Gary.
Well, I do like to teach the class on emerging markets because it gives me, and I would say my number one choice would be globalization, because those two topics do give the opportunity to kind of summarize what has happened up till now and what is going on in the world today and how the world is evolving, the big wide world of international business, which I think makes it those two topics the most interesting topics in a large sense to teach in the IB course.
Gary, do you use a certain case in that, or it's primarily lecture based or simulation? How do you teach that?
Well, I always use cases and exercises. I try to make my teaching very experiential. I used to be a straight kind of lecture person when I was teaching large classes of 200 students or whatever, back in 15, 20 years ago. But certainly for the last 5 or 10 years, I've tried to follow a teaching approach where I introduce a topic, trying to spend not much more than 20 minutes on lecture, and then I go straight into an exercise or an activity that reinforces that topic. It could be a case, it could be a mini case, it could be an exercise, so that my classes tend to be very interactive, and I think that's the best way to teach today.
So, Gary, we're all sitting on the edge of our seats. What's that case or exercise you use for emerging markets and internationalization?
Well, naturally, I use the cases on emerging markets in my textbook, which are featured in the emerging markets chapter. And we have added some new ones, but the point about emerging markets is that you have certain countries today that are emerging in a major way, and I think my focus is on the fact that this is increasingly the Asia phase, the Asia century, where India and China are really the most prominent countries, certainly by population, but also increasingly by size of economy in the world today.
Okay, great. Thanks for sharing that. Paul, can we go to you next?
Yeah, one of my favorites certainly would be the recently completed case on dominoes in Japan. Domino's has this very unique, and this is especially for the international division that's run out of Australia. The guys in Australia have got the rights to 10 countries. And what they've done in Japan flies in the face of IB literature and has been wildly successful. And what I love about this case is that it's about, speed, just as a competitive weapon, as the competitive weapon. And these guys are not interested in being the fastest delivery company for a decent pizza. They're in Japan. They're interested in being the fastest fast food company, which to me is a really interesting angle. What would it take to be the fastest of all of these quick service restaurants that we're all familiar with all the time? And so the case is fun to teach. Once people finally figure out what these guys are up to, it just sort of blows them away. So to me, it's just a great issue for any program.
Thanks very much, Paul. Mike, perhaps we can go to you next. And I've got a question here, if possible. Can you give us a little bit of insight into how you're starting to teach about exit? Because that was really quite interesting. You're talking about developing a new section on that. Are you already doing some teaching on that? Can you share a little bit with us about that?
Well, I already gave some glimpse that opening case with Apple exiting from China, migrating functions from China to India. That is a very delicate act to do. But you know what? Since I already gave the favorite class. Is it possible to ask my colleague and co-author Klaus Meyer? I know he's here, but I'm not sure if
Sure,
right now
maybe
at the
Klaus
moment.
can join in. That'd be
Klaus,
great.
yeah,
Klaus?
you can jump in and give a few minutes. Klaus, are you on? Maybe he walked away. But
Okay, maybe you can't
that
quite hear us now. We'll come back to Klaus in a bit. Maybe you can tell us then about your other favorite class, Mike.
oh yeah, like now scenario planning. I mean, from the MNEs in China that I spoke to, I believe most of them, if not all of them, are preparing a couple scenarios. What if there is a conflict over Taiwan? What do they do? What kind of people would they evacuate? What kind of people would they not want to evacuate? Okay, and so there are lots of ethical dimensions. There was this discussion about ethics. I actually made people write a one-page paper on ethical dilemmas. I saw Paul was talking about some misconduct. So in some cases, clearly do's and don'ts, right? But in a lot of these issues, we're talking about ethical dilemmas, choice one versus choice two. You have to make a choice. Both of them have merits, but both of them may open you up for legal or ethical liabilities, and none of them is comfortable. So you have to make some uncomfortable choices. So what is your poison that you will choose, right? So you will have to choose in your mind, the less toxic, least uncomfortable choice. That's the kind of class I'd like to engage my students, force them to answer, push them. They may not have the best answers, but we get a diversity of answers and thought process, and that's the kind of class. So the exit function is now a major research concern of mine and textbook writing concern of mine.
Thanks, Mike. Very interesting to hear about ethics and scenario planning. If we talk about scenario planning for a second, can you tell us, is there some case you particularly like to use or some framework you particularly use when you're teaching about scenario planning?
I have a table in chapter one, but the case I'm in the middle of trying to write. I don't have a good one. Sorry.
Okay, thanks. Charles, now over to you. What's your favorite session to teach?
Oh, that's such a hard question. I have so many favorites. One of the things that I like teaching is when there's a reveal to the students that they hadn't thought about. I should say, my global strategy course is for MBAs, not undergraduates. So they've already been through, 4 years of undergraduate, and you would think that they would know something about differences in economic development, about differences in culture, and about international trade. And often there are reveal moments when it's very clear that they actually don't know much about any of that. So talking about economic development is fascinating. I always like to talk about Hans Rosling. I don't know if you read his fantastic books, but he had this idea of the PIN number for the world in terms of population is right now, or this was 10 years ago, 1114. A billion people in the Americas, a billion people in Europe, a billion people in Africa, and 4 billion in Asia. And that, is maybe to the point that was made earlier about Asia being a primary market nowadays. But what I always liked about Hans's arguments would he say, well, where it's going to be in 50 years. It's going to be 1 in Europe. It's going to be 1 in the Americas. It's going to be 4 in Africa. 4 in Africa, and it's going to be 4 in Asia. I think he's wrong about Asia. The population is going to decline. I think he's right about Africa. If you want to think about what are the areas for dramatic growth, sub-Saharan Africa is a really interesting place. So that's a reveal that I always like. Another is on trade theory. Quite frankly, most of my students, you would think they would know what gains from trade are. They don't. And they come in with a prior belief that actually trade barriers and protectionism is good because it'll create more jobs in the United States. And they don't understand the complexities of international trade and how trade is a positive sum game that will raise all ships, and how buying stuff from other countries will create more jobs in your own nation. So that's always a reveal. I love teaching that stuff. And I love teaching the strategy stuff. So
Thanks very
I'm
much,
sorry, I
Charles.
didn't answer your question properly. I gave you 3 answers.
That's okay. We know you've been around doing this for a long time, hard to narrow it down to one. I'd like to turn to a question from one of the co-authors of the book, the co-author of Mike's book, Klaus Meyer, who we're trying to reach out to before. He has a question that actually was going to be my next question as well. And that is, what are the implications for what's been happening in Washington, D.C. over the last 3 days? Are the rules of the game as explained in our textbook still relevant, or do they need some changing? Perhaps we can start with Paul on this.
I'd love that, but yeah.
Paul, can you hear us?
Carl, the answer is, how long do you have? Okay, like, is anybody doing anything else for the rest of the day? Because this topic can drive all of us crazy. And one of the things that I've been trying to do is convince some people in Canada to get off the ledge. This nonsense will pass because, like Charles, if you have any real sense, ultimately, trade is good for both countries, and protectionism is, you may get a very short-term advantage in certain sectors, but for your whole economy, keep it open to a much greater extent. And so, we can't lose sight of that. We've got to sort of turn down the noise on this. I actually was talking the other day to the head of Ivy Publishing about the fact that, I've got some cases that I could dust off from 30 years ago when, this is sort of pre-NAFTA, which is going back about, how you manage in a world with tariffs. And, at the end of the day, it's just so artificial. You're only protecting jobs because of a regulation. It's not about comparative advantage, competitive advantage. It's artificial. And once people start to really internalize that, I think it's really calming, so that they realize this is not going to be everybody's future forever.
So, Paul, granted, there have been some cycles of this protectionism. But one important part of this question is there anything different now, that's not in what we're standardly teaching, what's not in your textbook now that needs to be added with the sort of political uncertainty and increasing protectionism and regionalism that we see now? Or is everything already accounted for?
Well, okay, you're never going to account for everything. But you've got to, how fine-grained do you want to get immediately on reacting? Okay, we shouldn't, just because it's in the news today, we shouldn't be overreacting to certain things. And I think all of our textbooks for the most recent editions have reflected the changes to more or less in the environment. And the reality is that we're not in an environment of liberalist expansion, free trade, respect for institutions, things like that. So, I think we can get always, for each edition, we'll see what sticks and or what we think is important, and we'll add it in the textbooks. But I think all of the books have reflected to some extent the changing environment.
Okay, thanks. Can we move to Mike next? Mike, what do you think?
Well, I would add that we are at a crossing point. In the 5th edition, in my international trade chapter, I added a debate first time. It's called gains from trade versus pains from trade. I beyond the political noise, I think we in academia, not we personally, but in academia, primarily economics, in real international trade theorists and empirical scholars, there is now quite a bit of work of documenting the pains from trade. And so it's useful for me to bring that literature into that chapter about international trade. It gains from trade for sure, but then there are documented cases and samples and groups and communities, as well as countries of people suffering from pains from trade. And I don't think we can shy away from that reality. It's again a great debate point. We all are avid consumers of international traded products, but So we do have an individual responsibility, but collectively, as a country, as a state, as a company, what is it that we do? So gains from trade versus pains from trade is already in chapter 5 of my book. I think we'll make bigger use of that.
Thanks. A nice phrase to remember, Mike. Gains versus pains. Gary, over to you. What do you think about what we're seeing in Washington these days?
Well, I won't speak to that directly, but I will say that it is a symptom of deglobalization, perhaps. I've always thought of globalization as a process. I've really always thought this of globalization as a process of two steps forward and one step back, two steps forward and one step back. And the reason for that is because people around the world react against globalization. I mean, for example, people in many countries react against Americanization and so forth. And so I think that's just a normal phenomenon. And particularly with, we now have 8 billion people in the world. The competition for resources is greater than ever before. All of these things we can easily imagine give rise to a certain amount of geopolitical tensions. But international business is still relevant, to put it mildly. The world is one big marketplace, increasingly, but the differences remain. And I've studied born global firms a lot, for instance, and so companies of all sizes and resource bases today are doing international business and see the whole world as their marketplace, but we need to train managers in how to function effectively in the global marketplace.
Thanks very much, Gary. Charles, what do you think? Does your book cover everything that's needed in the current realities of international trade and what's happening in Washington, or is some adjustment needed?
I started writing about this when Trump's first term took place. We had him putting trade barriers on, as you know, and we had Brexit. Both of those happened in 2016, 2017. So I started to write about it then and have continued to write about it ever since. Obviously, and in the latest edition of International Business that's coming out in January again, I was writing about it and hedging and saying, well, if Trump wins, then maybe we see more trade barriers. So I do deal with that explicitly, and increasingly have been dealing with that. I disagree with Paul a little bit. I understand when he says nonsense from Washington, but I do think we have shifted in the environment away from a rules-based multilateral order where the Washington consensus about the benefits of neoliberalism was widely accepted, to a situation where we do have a rise in economic nationalism. I think it's concerning. I think it's worrying. I think as academics, we have an obligation to point out the benefits from trade and lower barriers to trade and foreign direct investment, and how a rising tide will lift all boats. I will also tell you from personal experience that can get you in trouble with certain students, the parents of students, and certain universities. That's happened to me. In other words, I don't know how much I can say about this, but if you make certain statements about perhaps this policy is wrong, and the parents of some students disagree with you and write letters to local newspapers that then publish articles about liberal bias in textbooks being taught, you understand that we're in a tricky world. So it's a really interesting time that we live in, and international business is certainly more relevant than it's ever been. I hedged what I said there a little bit, didn't I?
Thanks, Charles. Very interesting. We've all dealt with some complicated situations before. And speaking of one of those complicated situations, time. Time is often scarce in teaching. And Terrence asked us now in our chat, he has only 12 to 14 hours of class time to teach an entire IB class. Is there any condensed IB textbook, or could you suggest like picking 3 chapters out of your book or something? Who'd like to tackle this one?
I can tackle that straight off the top very quickly in 30 seconds. Look, you can customize books now. They're all digital. I don't use all the chapters in my Global Business Today book for my MBAs. I have the same problem that you have, and I teach cases as well. So customizing and shopping is something I think that is increasingly easy to do given technology. I'd encourage you to do that.
Anyone else? Well, I think that was a good answer. I would like to ask one other question since we don't have any other questions now, and that is one of the other things we've seen some changes in recently is global supply chains and perhaps some pressure to duplication and more regionalization, et cetera. I wonder if this is featuring in your books, in your thinking, if someone would like to comment on that, including also John and Klaus, co-authors who have not been part of the panel today, if you'd like to say anything about this. Maybe we start with John or Klaus. Would either of you like to make a comment? If so, please unmute yourself.
Talking about Klaus Meyer and John Riesberger.
Yeah. Well, if not, let's stick with the panel members. Would any of the panel members like to tackle changes in global supply chains and how your books and thinking are evolving?
I don't want to take up all the answer. Somebody else should go first, but I do have stuff to say on this.
How about we start with Mike and then we'll go to Charles a little bit later.
One of the cases that I liked, well, I like all the cases, but that I liked writing, deals with a company called Heiko. It's a brush manufacturer, Australian origins, headquartered in Hong Kong, most of the manufacturing in China. And for all the reasons we understand, it needed to have less of the business in China. And so they moved to the Caribbean. And so it looks at, where you shift your manufacturing so that you can maintain the supplies of your products when there are political problems. But it also focuses on who you do it with, and so this one was about free trade zones, which is an old topic that doesn't get much emphasis. But as if you see the teaching note, I mean, what I start equating the arrangement with this free trade, the company in the free trade zone, it's actually a form of alliance. It's actually a form of joint venture. The way they've set this up in many respects. And so it's nice to see something like this come full circle from a theoretical perspective, but also be very, very practical as a way to deal with some of the current challenges, and especially on the supply side. People wanted a guaranteed supply for the US market. They had to get some of the manufacturing closer, and this was about it. And it's in a part of the world that doesn't get much attention. They set up this subsidiary that is now the single largest employer in the Dominican Republic. I mean, think about that. Like it's over 3,000 employees, manufacturing jobs. So this is a big deal.
Sounds really interesting, Paul. I think we had Mike wanting to say something as well. Mike Peng.
Sure. I actually have a different debate, which is about global value chains versus regional value chains. Whoever said value chains, you must add the word global in front of it. So the fact that we do have global value chains is a function and product of recent efforts of globalization. But regional value chains are not terrible. I mean, in automobile with NAFTA USMCA, clearly we have a North America-centered regional value chain, and then we have an Asia-centered, and then we have a Europe-centered automotive value chain. So, that's a debate. Regional value chain reduces a lot of risks, but you probably lose some of the access to the most efficient, lowest cost of products, components being made, but then geographical proximity being a plus factor. So the larger point is regional versus global. I thought about a different book by another friend of ours, George Yip. His book was Total Global Strategy. So that was perhaps a bit too much total global strategy, right? So I also had debate with another common friend of ours who passed away, Alan Rugman, He and I co-taught an EMBA class here at UT Dallas many years back. He said he liked my book except my title. My title was Global Business or Global Strategy. But I said, Alan, I know your point, but imagine if I change the title to Regional Business or Regional Strategy, would I still be able to market the books or sell the course to EMBAs? Right? So therefore, the word global still is valuable, but we're not preaching total global strategy, total global value chains. I think we're now living in a world of between total global, well, certainly, sorry, not total global, but between global and regional value chains.
Good suggestion, Mike. Maybe the next edition will be international business. In any case, moving to Charles, I think you had something to add.
Just very quickly, I have a chapter on supply chain management. Obviously, it's a massive headache for businesses, and there are issues about building redundancy into your supply chain and about building buffers into your supply chain that have become more important post both COVID and the rise of economic nationalism. So I think that's a topic that deserves more attention. I think it's going to be front and center of a lot of practical business decisions over the next 5 years, and we should be writing about it.
Gary, anything you'd like to add?
Yes, I mean, we address supply chain management and global sourcing in particular in our textbook. I think you're referring to a lot of restructuring that's been taking place in recent years. The pattern of global sourcing of supply chains is evolving. There's the phenomenon of reshoring and nearshoring. And recently, by the way, I'm working on a case called on Bath and Body Works, which is an interesting U.S. company which over the last 5 years or so has reconstituted all of its suppliers into their headquarters town of New Albany, Ohio, which is the geographic center of the U.S. for logistical reasons. And they find that they're getting, they formerly did all of their manufacturing or most of it in China, but they find that by leveraging technology and by having their suppliers much closer at hand, that they can provide greater value to their customers. So we do live in a time, again, part of this, the overall phenomenon of globalization and the fact that some aspects constitute deglobalization. Technology and other factors are allowing nearshoring and reshoring. And so that's just another interesting dimension of international business. But if we always remember the concept of comparative advantage, I think that it's fair to say that there will always be countries that are more advantaged in this or that product or service or activity than other countries. And consequently, that would suggest that international business, global business, and global value chains will persist and continue to be important going forward for, I don't know, for as long as you can imagine. I mean, there will always be countries that are better at doing certain things than other countries, it seems to me, and that implies that trade and investment will continue to be a factor.
Thanks very much, Gary. Really interesting comments. We've talked about the political changes that are happening and how this is affecting IB. There have also, of course, been technological changes going on, the largest of which probably AI. We talked a little bit about how AI is being used in teaching, but how about how AI is affecting international business itself? Is this something that any of you have some views on and might be in your current edition or in future editions of your book? Anyone like to comment on that?
Well, I will just say that I was asked recently by another institution actually to teach an IB course which is heavily integrated with AI. And that forced me to think about using how I would convert to some extent. It wouldn't take a huge conversion. All of my teaching materials and my exercises to such that students could do the exercises and cases using AI, and I think that's quite relevant. We have one of my professor colleagues is teaching a course called more or less management decision making using AI, and it's an extremely popular class. So I think that the phenomenon is with us to stay, and we have to embrace it. But I think clearly that one perspective is that these kinds of technologies give a disproportionately large advantage to small and medium enterprises and would make them more efficient and more effective in international business than perhaps ever before in a disproportionate sense relative to traditional large MNEs.
Thanks very much, Gary. Anyone else want to comment on AI and international business?
I've been asked this question before. I'm thinking about it. You know, I don't have a rational response at this point. AI is a productivity tool. We're starting to see some of the productivity benefits flow through in terms of increasing total productivity, total factor productivity. There are early signs that it's having an impact. What are the unique implications of that for international business? I don't think we've worked that out.
Okay,
I think we need
to wrap things up, thanks, Charles. We have one final question from Sandra, and she says, I would like to know what you think about this. While some governments are becoming more restrictive towards migration, companies are facing labor shortages. According to the WEF, demand for migration workers is increasing worldwide. How can this tension be managed? Anyone want to comment on this?
Yes, but somebody else go.
I would just simply.
I'll come.
Oh, go ahead, Charles. Go ahead.
Well, it just, you know, this is a huge issue. And it's obviously come to the fore in the United States recently with all the kerfuffle about H-1B visas. And the reality is that the migration of labor is a large and probably likely to be continuing force in the world economy. And that if we restrict migration, it's going to create significant problems and require international business to do what some of our politicians don't want it to do, which is to move more production to other countries where there's more available labor. It is absolutely true that without immigration, for example, the US population would be shrinking. I don't know how many of you know this. 17% of the US population is not native, working population is not native born. And that's probably an underestimate. So, you know, without migration, we're probably going to have a problem in doing the things that our politicians think we should do. And this does create fundamental problems for international business. I'm not sure how the heck we are going to be able to make the investments that our politicians are talking about without large flow of human capital. So it's something that we should be writing about. It's something that we should be thinking about. It's something that should be in our textbooks, I think.
Look, we could talk a lot more about this and a lot more about all these different things, but I'm afraid our time has run out. So we're going to have to stop at that point. With this, I would like to thank everyone for attending today. I hope it has been an interesting learning experience. It sure has been for me. It's been great to have authors of 4 of the absolute leading IB textbooks with us today. I'd like to especially thank Charles Hill, Mike Peng, Gary Knight, and Paul Beamish for sharing your thoughts with us. We've learned a lot more about your textbooks and look forward to following their evolution and moving forward. Thanks very much, everyone, for a great session.
Thank you, Carl.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very enjoyable. Thank you, Carl, for
Good
organizing.
to see you all.
Bye.
See you all. Take care, Charles.
See you, Mike.
Oh, I'm having difficulty today, but I'm glad we managed, so thanks so much.
Thanks, Mike. Great to see you and really good presentation. Excellent job.
Thank you. How do I exit this? It says,
Bottom right, there's something that says end. I'll end it for everyone now, actually.
okay,
Bye-bye.
all right, take care.